When I was in college during my junior year, I lived in a house with another roommate. It was a 2-bedroom house, and my roommate Bianca was good friends with me. We met freshman year, and our senior year we were going to be living as roommates in an apartment instead of a house. The house was cool overall, but the apartment was going to be a little nicer. I remember that we got this crappy couch from Bianca's parents that we had when we lived in the house. We wanted to get rid of it when we were moving to the apartment. The couch was pretty large, and for the apartment we were not going to be bringing it over. So towards the end of our lease, a few days before we were going to move into the apartment, we decided to give the couch away. It was in pretty good shape, and if someone wanted it, they could take it. If not, we would just throw it away. We listed it for free on Craigslist and took some pictures of it and stuff. A few days went by and there was no interest. Then I remembered that Bianca told me someone was coming over to take it later on in the day. I asked who, and she just said some guy. Bianca had made the listing and was kind of taking care of things, so I just said okay, and I was glad we were getting rid of it. So sometime that afternoon, I heard Bianca say that the guy was going to be there soon. I went down into the living room, and we had the couch there as well as some chairs and a coffee table and some other stuff. There were boxes around because we were preparing to move. The couch was large and would be at least a 2-person job to move it, so I was going to help. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang, and a man was there on the front step. We opened the door and let him inside to see the couch. He said that he had a pickup truck, and we looked outside and saw a pretty large one. The man then started looking at the couch. He went around it to all corners and seemed to be measuring to see if it would fit in his truck. We made some basic average small talk about stuff during this time. Overall, he seemed like a pretty normal guy for the most part. Then we helped him pick up the couch and carry it out the door and to his truck. After that, he left, and our couch was finally gone. Now, fast forward to later that night. It was about 9 or 10 o'clock. I remember that Bianca told me that the guy who got the couch had just texted her again. He asked her if he had forgotten his wallet at our house by chance. My first reaction was, how on earth would he forget his wallet in our house? I thought there was no way. He was barely inside and didn't pay us or anything. Still, we looked around a little. The guy texted again saying he thought it might have fallen out of his pocket on the floor while he was lifting the couch or something. We looked and at first still didn't see anything. Then I moved one of the chairs in the living room to see a small black wallet. It was like directly underneath the center of the chair. I really have no idea how it could get that far underneath if it had just simply fallen out of his pocket. But nevertheless, it was there. I looked inside of it and there was no driver's license. However, there was 3 $1 bills and what appeared to be a debit card. That was it. Really not much for a wallet. So Bianca texted him that we had it, and he said that he would be there in about 10 minutes. Now, this is when things get really weird. Like just 2 or 3 minutes after that, I went to turn on the outside light to the front step. When I did, I saw what looked like the man walking sort of in our yard. He was barely in my sight and kind of walking between our yard and the neighbors. I moved to get a better look, but he had walked away. I only saw him for like a second. I didn't see his truck parked in the street or anything though. Then I went up to my bedroom to get a better look at the side yard and backyard. When I did, I actually saw the guy again. He walked around to the backyard and then was sort of looking at the house. It was really creepy. The lighting back there was not good at all, so I could honestly barely see him. Bianca came up and was looking as well. We were asking each other what the man was doing. Bianca was so creeped out that she said she didn't even want to give him his wallet back anymore. We were seriously considering calling the police. Then we noticed the man walk out of the end of the backyard and into the neighbors behind us' backyard. So after that, he was out of our sight. Then, maybe 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. Bianca and I went down and looked out of the living room window to see the guy standing on the front step. He knocked on the door again moments later. Bianca went over to the door but did not open it. She said from the other side that we had his wallet. The man then asked for the door to be opened so that he could come in. Bianca said no, she would just hand him the wallet and he would leave. The man did not seem happy with this. He seemed surprised and asked what the problem was. We didn't want to let him know that we saw him in the yard for fear of how he might react. Bianca just said that he needed to take his wallet and then leave. I remember the man started saying how he was going to give us both a cash reward for giving him his wallet back if we would let him in. I was thinking, what is he going to give us, $1 each? Because there were only $3 in the wallet. Maybe he had more money on him, but nevertheless, I didn't really believe it. In fact, this only creeped us out more. Bianca did not open or unlock the door. Instead, she just took the wallet and walked over to a window. Then she opened it up and threw the wallet out in the direction of the man. She said, "There's your wallet, now go." Then she closed the window quickly. The man picked up the wallet, but knocked on the door again, saying that he wanted to give us a cash reward. That's when Bianca yelled at him and threatened to call the police. Finally, the man left. We were both very creeped out by his behavior. We stayed up late, but thankfully he did not return. Days later, we moved into our apartment and had no more problems with the guy. Looking back, Bianca and I both think that the man planted a fake wallet under the chair. He obviously wanted an excuse to go back to our place. Why, I don't know. I remember one really scary experience that I had back when I was in high school. I was a sophomore, and I used to ride the bus to and from school every day. One day, there was a pretty typical day of school. I went to all my classes, and nothing strange or unusual happened. When the last bell of the day rang at 2:45 p.m., school was out and we could go home. I remember that this time was always crazy and would be a mad dash to get to the bus on time. A lot of kids went to my school, and in between every class the hallways would be packed. So after school, it was always really tough to walk through the halls. And the buses left at just after 2:50, so you only had 5 minutes to get to them. On this day, I left my classroom and made my way to my locker. I had to go there to get something before going to the bus. This proved to be a mistake, because after literally running through the hallways and getting outside, I saw that I had missed the bus. I was really disappointed, because I lived too far away from the school to walk home. I also didn't have any good friends with cars, so I would have to wait for my mom to get off of work and give me a ride. Fortunately for me, my mom got off of work at about 3:30 or 4 p.m. usually, so I would only have to wait at the school for about an hour or so. So after calling my mom, I went back inside of the school, not really knowing what I was supposed to do. I had never missed the bus before, and had never stayed after school unless I had a sports practice. When I went back inside of the school, I saw that there were only a few students still inside, mostly just upperclassmen who drove themselves. Within probably 10 more minutes, the hallways became completely empty with just me walking down them. Now, my school did not really have any places to hang out at all. There were no study areas or couches or chairs set up. It was just hallways and classrooms, really. So I figured that I would just walk the halls while I waited for my mom to come to the school. I remember that I walked the halls for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I made it towards the back end of the school, and things were completely empty. Then I heard this sound come over the school speakers. It was followed by an announcement that there was a lockdown and that this was not a drill. At first, I was very confused. I didn't know that there would be lockdowns when school was not in session, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do in this type of a situation. Obviously, I was not in class, and didn't have a classroom to go to either. I looked around at the classrooms that I was passing by, and all their doors were closed, and they seemed to be empty. I kept walking, thinking maybe I would just leave the school altogether. That's when I came around a corner, and way up down the hallway, I saw this guy wearing all black and a ski mask on his head. I knew that something was up there, and I quickly went back around the corner. I saw the bathrooms and quickly went inside them. Once I was there, I stopped and listened to see if the person would go near. I figured the bathrooms were really the only place I could hide for the lockdown. For a minute or two, things were pretty quiet, and I didn't hear anything. Then I started to hear footsteps not far out in the hallway. They didn't really get that close though, but seemed to be a ways away. Moments later, I heard a very loud banging sound, like someone was smashing the lockers or something. I didn't know what exactly it was, but it made me feel on edge. These sounds went on for a while. Then, after about a minute or so of quiet, I heard more loud banging followed by the sound of glass breaking. It was from a ways down the hallway, but I no longer felt safe hiding in the bathroom. When things quieted down a little bit again, I knew that I needed to get out of there. I carefully went to the entrance of the bathrooms and looked out into the hallway. I didn't see anything, indicating that the sounds I heard must not have been within my sight. Then I quickly left the bathroom and ran the opposite direction to where I had heard the noises. I ran all the way until I got to the front of the school. When I got towards the lobby, I saw a police officer. He seemed a little bit surprised to see me, but I quickly told him how I had seen a guy in a ski mask and stuff. Another police officer who had entered the school told me to go outside the front door and they would handle it. I went out and there were several police cars. I waited there while the police went inside, and my mom got there a little while later. I was able to go home with her, and there were a bunch of police cars still there and the police in the school at that point. I went home and heard about the rest on the news. The police had ended up finding a guy inside and catching him. The man had simply walked inside the school wearing a ski mask after hours. Obviously it was suspicious, and he got reported. I guess he went around and caused a bunch of damage to the school, breaking windows to several classrooms and breaking other equipment as well. That must have been what I had heard. It was a very scary situation, and I'm glad that I was able to get out of it. This is something that happened when I was fresh out of college working my first real job. I had several college internships, but this job was one that I had really wanted. I had to move to a completely new state and city, and the interview for the job was intense. But it was a career that I had wanted, and I felt prepared, even though the jobs are pretty competitive. I was not the only person to be hired at this particular company. They hired 5 of us new employees for the department. Most of us were fresh from college. We would have to work our way up the ranks, and I knew that it might get a bit competitive. My goal was to just control what I could control and always work very hard. The company helped new employees get places to live, because it was common for employees to have to move around a lot. So after getting hired, I agreed to move into this new apartment and become roommates with a coworker. It was kind of weird because we were both just hired and in some ways competing with each other for promotions in the future. The guy that I lived with was named Derek. He seemed pretty normal at first. He kind of gave me the impression that he was a little greedy and selfish though, but other than that he seemed like a pretty normal guy for the most part. We started our new job at the same time and we were kept pretty busy. By the time we would leave work, it would be nighttime. I would pretty much just go back to my room and then go to sleep. Our apartment was fairly nice. It was really new and it had a living room and kitchen in the middle. Then on one side was my bedroom and bathroom and on the other side was Derek's. So we each had our own room and stuff. We didn't really interact with each other much, if at all, around the apartment. We didn't carpool to work or anything either. One time we did though, and he drove, and then he Venmo requested me $5 for gas, even though it was like a 5-minute drive. So I decided not to do that again. After living with Derek for like 2 months and working with him, I didn't like him at all. At work, I didn't interact with him a ton, but being in our group, I'd hear him say stuff. He wasn't a very likable guy. So nothing really crazy happened until like a month into the job. We had both been doing an overall pretty good job at work despite not getting along very well. I was proud of my performance to that point. I would get there early, leave late, and even do work at home sometimes. We had our folders with files and notebooks, as well as stuff on our work laptops. One morning though, I remember that I woke up and almost missed work. My phone was dead, and thankfully I somehow naturally woke up only like 15 minutes later than usual. I was so confused though, because I was sure that I had plugged my phone into charge when I went to bed. I mean, I did that every single night. However, I figured that I must have somehow forgot. I scrambled to get to work and was still on time. Several days later though, I was even closer to being late. I remember that I woke up to my alarm that was going off, except it was right at the time that I would normally leave, so I had no time to get ready at all. I went as quick as I could and was just able to make it. It was such a rush that it wasn't until later that I thought about how that could possibly happen. I would plug in my phone and set my alarm for the same time every morning, so why on earth would it not go off until like an hour later? Or how could I have possibly slept through it for that long? I'm not a deep sleeper. That's when I had the idea that maybe Derek messed with my phone. Maybe he was trying to get me fired or something. The phone couldn't just have the alarm go off so late on its own. That made no sense. So that night when we were both home from work, I told Derek about what happened. I didn't accuse him, but I was just saying how it didn't make any sense. His response really ticked me off. He said, "I don't know, man, that's your problem. Learn how to wake up on time or maybe you shouldn't be working here." So a few days went by without anything strange happening. Then, one morning when I woke up, all my files were out of my folder and on the floor. They had been organized and now they were all out of order, which was pretty important. So I had to reorganize them before work, which almost made me late again. I knew at that point that Derek was messing with me. Even though on a slim chance maybe the folder had just fallen off the desk because it had been on the edge of it. But things wouldn't get messed up that much. So that day after work I accused Derek. I told him to stop messing with me. He said that I was just a disorganized slob and I was crazy for accusing him. I thought about what I could do. I couldn't report Derek to work or anything because I didn't have sure proof, and I knew that Derek would probably make something up about me if I did. So instead, I tried to take measures to prevent Derek from messing with me. I couldn't do anything drastic like stay up all night to try to catch him. I needed to get to bed at a decent time to be up early and get rest. I also couldn't install a lock on my bedroom door because our apartment prohibited it, and for some reason the bedroom doors didn't have locks on them, which makes no sense. Just the bathrooms had locks. So I decided to sleep with my phone under my pillow. That way, if Derek tried to grab it, I would wake up. I also kept my files hidden in my room. One night, I did stay up like an hour later than usual pretending to sleep, hoping to catch Derek, but nothing happened that night. For like a week, things were good. Then, one night, Derek really did it. I woke up to find that my work laptop had been unplugged and was dead. Also, my work clothes, which were a suit and tie, were all wrinkled. It was like somebody had deliberately messed them up. I was so mad that I wanted to punch Derek in the face. I went out into the kitchen area and started yelling at him. He denied everything and then just walked away back to his room and said that he didn't care. I threatened to report him and he said that nobody would believe me. He told me I was delusional. Good thing for me, I had other clothes I could wear and I could charge my laptop just enough before leaving, so I went back to my room and got ready for work. But it was like Derek was trying to sabotage me into getting fired or quitting or something, or else he just hated me for some reason. I wanted to move out of the apartment badly, but we had a lease, and I couldn't prove that he had done anything wrong really. I wasn't quite sure what to do. I started hiding everything. I was keeping my phone, laptop, and work clothes as well as files hidden. I was putting other things in places where it would be really loud to move them. One night, I actually sort of caught Derek. I woke up to a sound in my room. When I opened my eyes, it was very dark, but I saw movement. I quickly turned on the lamp next to my bed and saw Derek sprinting out of the room. I yelled at him, but he was back in his room within seconds. I got up and followed him out, but he had like a 10-second head start on me. When I got to his room, he was in bed pretending to sleep. I called him out for being in my room, and he pretended that I had just woken him up and got all mad at me. He claimed I was crazy, so I went back to my bedroom at that point. I still didn't have any proof of anything. Over the next few days, nothing else crazy happened. Maybe after that close call for Derek, he decided to take a break from messing with me. But then, something unexpected happened. During the workday, I heard that Derek had been fired. I hadn't seen him in a few hours, and another coworker said that he had been harassing a female coworker. He had violated the rules and was let go. So the rest of the workday after that was several more hours. When I got back home that night, Derek was gone. However, the entire apartment had been trashed. My stuff and the furniture that came with the apartment was all messed up and all over the floor. He smashed the TV, broke several lamps, and tables were tipped over. And my bedroom was the worst. He really took his time with that. I took pictures of all the damage and reported it to the apartment. I was told that Derek would be prosecuted by the apartment as well. After that, I never saw him again. He was definitely the worst coworker as well as roommate that I ever had. This is something that happened back when I was a kid, and I still talk with my sister about it from time to time. So, I was 8 years old and my sister was 13. This was back in like the mid-2000s or so, and there was this library that was less than a mile away from my house. We lived in this neighborhood, and if you took the sidewalk to the end of the street and turned, the library was straight that way pretty much. It only took about 15 minutes to walk there. We would go to the library all the time because it was close and because we liked to rent books and videos. One time my sister asked if I wanted to go with her to the library, and I said yes. It was just us two, so we walked there and then went inside. My sister and I were not really interested in the same types of books. So after getting to the library, like normal, we split up and went in different areas. Whenever it was time to go, my sister would just let me know and then we would leave. The library was fairly large, and I went into the children's section and started looking for good books. To me, a good book would be if it had a lot of cool pictures in it and not that many words. I went to this one spot and was by myself. I started taking some books off the shelf and looking at them one by one. Over time, I remember that I heard someone else enter the aisle that I was in. I looked over and it was another kid who looked a little older than me, maybe 10 or so. I just remember that he had sort of blonde hair and he walked right up to me. Then he started bullying me for no reason. I had no idea who the kid was, but he just started making fun of me. He asked what book I was reading, and I don't remember what it was, but I think it was just some typical kid's storybook. When I showed it to him, he laughed and said that that book sucked and I was lame. Then I remember he asked if I even knew how to read, and he said that I looked like I didn't. I told him I could read, and then he started to make fun of how I looked and stuff. I had no idea why this kid just came out of nowhere and started roasting me. It made me feel kind of bad at first, but I also realized that this kid didn't know me at all. I told him to go away, and he did, but before doing so, he said a few more mean things to me. Then I tried to forget about it, and I just went back to looking at books. For the next 10 minutes or so, things were fine. Then, out of nowhere, I felt something hit me in my back. It was a book. I did not know where it had come from. Moments later, another book hit me. I heard laughter coming from sort of behind me and a ways back, and I looked to see the kid standing there and laughing. He had been throwing books at me. Then he threw another one. I tried to catch it, but it hit me in the chest. He laughed at that as well. Now the kid was being violent, and I knew that I needed to get away from him. Sure, I wanted to fight him, but he was older and larger than me, and I knew it probably wouldn't go well. So I got up and I ran out of there and went to find my sister. The kid didn't follow me or anything. My sister was way on the other end of the library, and it was nice to get away from that kid. It felt much more quiet and calm near where my sister was. I told her about the kid. She said she wanted to see who he was, so we went back over there. However, when we got back there, he was gone. After that, I finished picking out the books that I wanted to get, and my sister did as well. So, I would say about 20 minutes later, we were both ready to leave. My sister found me, and we started to head back up to the front to check out our books. However, as we were approaching, we heard the sound of some people yelling. Soon, we got close enough, and I saw the same kid who had been bullying me. He was yelling at one of the librarians. I wasn't sure why, but they were arguing, and then I saw the kid go over to a display and knock it over. Several other people were just standing around and watching. Then I saw a man who I assumed to be the kid's dad go over to him, and the man was also yelling at another librarian. It was a large dispute, and the dad then announced loudly that they were leaving, and then he started cursing loudly and they both walked out. I was shocked at what I had seen, but after thinking about it for a second, I was not surprised at all that the kid acted that way. After that, we checked out our books and left. I'm guessing that the kid had been caught throwing books or being rude to someone or something like that. He was probably asked to leave, and his father didn't seem much better than him. I didn't really make out what specifically the argument was about, but I'm happy to say that after that, I never saw that kid again. Back in the 90s when I was in high school, I was very good with my hands and worked jobs like construction, demolition, flooring, and auto mechanics. One of the jobs I did was working for a guy doing remodeling projects, like at restaurants, bars, retail shops, and typical commercial projects. I went to school during the day, of course, and would sometimes work after school or weekends. For the guy I worked for, it wasn't uncommon for him to leave me alone at a site and have a list of things for me to do alone, mostly demolition work. He picked me up one Saturday morning as I didn't have a car or license yet, so he would pick me up and drive me to sites for work and then leave me alone there. I rarely worked with his other crews as they were the more skilled laborers, so I would tear up the place before the main crew would come in and do all the remodeling. Here's the part that was my major downfall to this story. I didn't pay attention to where we were going. I was too busy talking to him, and I think we were talking about cars or something. It took a long time to get to the site, and as we drove up, it was in the middle of nowhere in the Mojave Desert. I knew we left the highway and went down a few other 2-lane highways for a long distance, but I had no idea where we were. I had a big jug of water with me because the water to the house I would be working at was off. When we pulled up to the house, I pulled all my tools out of the truck before he left, and he then drove to another site that he would be working on. He told me that he would be back to pick me up at about 5 or 6 p.m., since it should only take me until then to do what I needed to do. That was always his way of saying, I'm only paying you till this time, so you better get everything done by then. It was never unfair, and we always had a good understanding on time and tasks. He drove away, and I was at this property all alone. I walked into the house, and it was mostly empty. My job was to remove all the remaining furniture, contents, and appliances, remove all the flooring, gut the kitchen and bathroom, and remove all the wood paneling. I was used to being on sites alone and working all night, and this was in the daytime on a Saturday, but the house kind of gave me the spooks. The house was old, dark, musty, and kind of cool inside, the kind of cool that gives you the goosebumps. I started removing all the junk from the house as I normally did on a project. I tore up all the flooring next, and to my delight, everything seemed to come up with ease, and it was rip, cut, and toss. I took a big demo hammer to the kitchen and tore it apart in less than an hour. I ended up using the big jug of water that my boss had given me to wash my hands and face periodically, so by late afternoon, I was down to my last drink and had already ate everything I brought. No worries though, because I would be getting picked up in a couple of hours. I finished all my tasks and even swept the entire place so the next crew could get right to work later that week. At that time of year when I was out there, it wasn't a typical hot desert day, but you know in the desert, as soon as the sun goes down, it starts to cool rapidly. I had a flannel shirt, but that wasn't enough, and it was starting to get dark. My ride was running late, so all I could do was wait. This was the time before cell phones were common, and there was no electricity, water, or phone service in the house. I climbed up to get to the top of the roof of the house to get a better look to see if I could see something in the distance. Miles down a smaller road, I saw a few homes, but those homes were all dark. My first thought was to hike down to a neighbor's house and ask them to use a phone. I didn't want to leave though, in fear of missing my ride, especially since it didn't look like anyone was home since no lights were on in any houses. I started to think about my options as darkness approached fast. My options were either to stay at the house until morning, hike what little water I had a few miles in the desert at night, or wait until early morning and hike out there to some sort of civilization. I decided my best option was to just stay and hope that my ride would show up. It also suddenly occurred to me that no one knew where I was except my boss. I don't know if he told anyone else where I was either. My family wouldn't miss me until maybe Sunday night because they knew me and how much I would work, and they never worried about me not coming home. As full darkness was all around me, I didn't have a flashlight or any way to make a fire, but luckily the moonlight was bright. It was getting cold outside, so I went back inside the empty, creepy house that somehow seemed even more creepy when mostly empty. At about 8 p.m., the batteries on my radio, which was my only source of a little light and noise, started to die. I grabbed an old wooden chair and just sat in the living room of this house doing absolutely nothing except waiting. I started to hear the wind and odd noises, which I assumed were animals in the distance. I started to shiver from the cold, and my mind might have started to play tricks on me. I saw shadows moving outside and inside the house. I also started to hear someone talking, like whispers or something. I was sure I was going crazy and got up from my chair and yelled out hello, and just as I did, I heard something fall on the other side of the house. I had enough of this creepy house, so I went to go outside again. At least in the moonlight I could see better. Off in the distance I heard noises and saw movement, but couldn't make out anything. I had a pile of tools by the edge of the house ready for when my boss picked me up, so I ran over there and grabbed a heavy pry bar. I was ready to defend myself for whoever was out there. I had to keep moving, because my undershirt and flannel shirt were not enough to keep me warm. The wind was also starting to pick up, and as far as I could see, there was no lights around me. I didn't want to try to make it up on the house again out of fear of falling in the dark, but I got up on top of the gate just to try to gain a little bit of height to see if I could see some house lights nearby or car lights. My mind went to the stories that circled around at the time, about people who would come up to the Mojave Desert and bury bodies, how there were evil groups out here, and how people would go missing for no reason. Every noise had me on edge, and every shadow had my heart pounding. I knew no one was in the house, but I was sure I could hear noises from inside. I huddled up on the front porch for warmth, looking in the living room window, expecting to see someone at any moment. By around 11 p.m., I looked at my watch, thinking this was going to be a long night, as all this stuff only happened since it got dark. I didn't know how I was going to make it for another 6 hours until daybreak. Closer to midnight, I was wide awake. My eyes were only fixed on the dirt road, thinking that any time now a car would come down and maybe they could help me. I remember casually turning around to look back to the house, because all this time I kept hearing noises, but I told myself it was a rat or some animal. I saw a shadow of a person moving from the kitchen to down the hall. I jumped up from sitting and started backing my way out of the porch away from the house. As I was backing up, I tripped over the debris pile and fell down on the ground. I tried to get up, but fell again. It was like something pushed me down, or my imagination, but all of a sudden these bright lights were coming closer to me as I was laying on the ground. I saw my boss standing above me with a flashlight, wondering what I was doing on the ground. I was just so glad to see him. I wasn't mad. I just asked him what happened. He said that he was sorry, but he thought the other crew was coming to get me, and they thought he was coming, so no one actually came. He said it wasn't until later in the evening he asked the other crew leader about how far along the house I had got, and that's when they realized I was still out there. My boss felt really bad and told me he was going to pay me for the entire time I was out there. As he was driving me home, I asked about the house and told him how creepy it was. He said he didn't have any information on the house and only just knew what we were supposed to do. I don't know if I was going delusional or something, but that time I spent out there by myself, lost in the middle of the desert at night, was the scariest night of my life. What was so weird is I never saw any headlights of a car approaching. My only memory of being rescued was seeing my boss standing over me with his flashlight. I'm not exactly sure what happened that night, but it was so creepy. After that, I made sure to always keep extra batteries, a flashlight, and double the amount of liquid with me. It was a Friday night, and I was going to the movies with my girlfriend. We went to the local theater nearby where we live, which is a pretty nice one. When we got inside that evening, it was very busy. People were all over the place and throughout the lobby. We got in, got tickets for the movie we were watching, and then went to the theater and got to our seats. We sat in the second to last row in the back of the theater. I would say that a little more than half of the seats in the theater were taken for this movie. Behind us, there was one guy who was probably in his early 20s who sat behind my girlfriend and I. Other than that, there were a few people at the far other end of that aisle. So, not long after the movie started, the guy behind us started tossing popcorn at my girlfriend. I remember noticing her react and wondering what had just happened. A short time later, I saw a piece of popcorn fly over our seats. I looked back, and the guy acted like nothing happened. I didn't really know what was going on, but a short time later, my girlfriend was hit in the head with a piece of popcorn. At that point, I turned around and looked at him again. I knew that he had intentionally thrown them at her, and this was no accident. I motioned for him to stop, and he looked at me but did not really say or do anything. For the next few minutes, he did stop though, and things were fine. Then he randomly did it again a while later. I was really annoyed about this guy now and wanted to confront him, but I kept my cool. He didn't do anything for a little while, and I thought that maybe we could just enjoy the rest of the movie. Then my girlfriend said that she was going to use the restroom and would be right back. She stood up and started to walk away, and when she did, the guy behind me whistled. I looked back at him and told him to stop, saying that it was disrespectful to do that. When I was talking to the guy, he started making the talking motion with his hands, which made me even more mad. So it was just me and this guy now, and I asked him if he wanted to go outside. I was much larger than him. When I said this, the guy raised his hands and shook his head. I didn't really think he was that serious, but he seemed like he didn't want to fight me. I told him that if he did anything else, we were going to have a problem. A short time later, my girlfriend entered the theater again. I was nervous that the guy would do something, but he didn't. For the next period of time, things were okay. The guy seemed to just be watching the movie like everyone else. Then he randomly just got up and left. I was more than happy to see that. I wasn't sure if he would be back, but surprisingly, he did not return for the rest of the movie. When the movie was over, my girlfriend and I were talking about how crazy the guy behind us was. We got up and left, and then we were walking through the parking lot to get to my car. It was not quite as busy anymore, but I had parked really far in the back of the lot because when we got there it was packed. As we made it near my vehicle, I saw several young men standing around a car. I soon noticed that the guy who had sat behind us was one of them. As we were walking past, the guy called out to us. He called either me or my girlfriend a curse word, and I was not going to take it, and I fired an insult back at him. We went back and forth briefly, but I kept walking and didn't want to fight the guy. We made it to the car and then got inside. However, when I started to drive away, I noticed that the car that the guys had been standing around was now right behind us. I knew that they were likely going to follow us, and they did. We left the parking lot and got out onto the street, and the guys behind us did the same. They were driving borderline recklessly and jerking around the road keeping up with us. I had a bad feeling about it, so I decided to turn around and go back to the movie theater. My thinking was that if we got back into the lobby, we would not have to deal with the guy because there were lots of other people around. They'd probably leave us alone at that point and then drive away. So I made a U-turn at a light, and the guys behind us quickly did the same. I was even wondering if they were going to try to wreck us because they were driving so crazy. I got back to the theater, found an open parking space near the front, and took it. The guys drove a little ways past us and then parked in another space. My girlfriend and I got out and quickly walked back into the theater. When we got inside there, the men from the car did not follow us. They seemed to be staying at their vehicle. I went and reported to one of the theater staff, and surprisingly, they knew who I was talking about. The employee I spoke with told me that the guy and one of his friends had been banned from the theater several weeks earlier. He was seen there that night though, and they had left the building when they were threatened with police. The theater employee said that he would call the police if they were still there. After looking out in the parking lot, the car was in fact still there. We waited in the lobby until the cops arrived. They ended up getting the guys to leave, and they obviously were not supposed to come back. My girlfriend and I then went home. Since then, we haven't had a problem at that theater. That was a while ago, and we still go there. Hopefully, I never see those guys again, and they don't go back to the theater. This is a crazy experience that I had when I went to an NFL game a couple of years ago. I live out east, and there's several NFL stadiums that are really not that far apart from one another. I was actually going to a road game one time when my favorite team was playing there. This stadium was not really that far away, so I was able to make the drive. Finding parking was kind of tough though because it was my first time at that stadium. However, I ended up finding a cheap parking ramp, except it was a good 20-minute walk from the field. But I'm in good shape and I don't mind walking, so it's fine. It was my first time there, and being a fan of the road team, I expected to get some booze. This was a night game, so it was a little different than the typical Sunday game at 1 o'clock. It seemed like the crowd was a little crazier, even though they can always get crazy. Or maybe that's just how things are at this particular stadium. So anyways, the game was a fun time. A few fans gave me a hard time, but nothing that I couldn't handle. There was also a decent amount of fans for my team, and they were cool. Unfortunately, my team lost, but I was still glad to have seen the game in person. When an NFL game ends, the walkways in the stadium become extremely crowded, so it's nearly impossible to make it out in a decent time. So I remember that as I was walking up the stairs of the aisle to get to the concourse, there was a line there. I was slowly making my way up, and other fans were leaving the seating area to the stairs. This big guy who was a fan of the other team just ran into me. He was coming from the seats, and I was walking up the stairs. He literally just barged his way onto the stairs instead of waiting and nearly knocked me over. I kinda shoved him back and said, "Watch it, pal." He then cursed at me and then rubbed it in how my team had lost and I suck and all that. But it wasn't in a joking way, this guy just seemed rude. I tried to squeeze my way ahead of him out of anger, and also because I was now squished between like 5 people. The man literally grabbed me and pushed me back. We then got into it a little bit verbally. We were basically cursing each other out and going back and forth. Within maybe 20 seconds, another fan kind of stepped between us and told us to forget it. I did want to forget it. I used this opportunity to turn and walk in front of him and squeeze past a few other people. The guy tried going after me, but he was a lot bigger and wouldn't be able to get through the people like I could. I made it into the concourse, which was now loaded with people. I did my best to make my way to the exits. Everyone is really packed in like sardines though, so you can only really take very small steps. I hoped that I would not see the angry fan again since I had gotten into it with him. I figured that with me getting in front of him, he was angry, but I also figured that he was probably drunk and I would never see him again, especially with all these people. So I kept walking, and it probably took 10 minutes to make it out of the stadium. Once I was out though, things cleared up a bit, but it was still very crowded. People were dispersing into all different directions, and traffic cops were blocking all the roads in the immediate area. In the sea of people though, I looked back to the stadium and I saw the same angry fan. I couldn't believe it. We made eye contact for like a second, and then I saw him walking towards me. I literally turned and ran the other way. I then walked quickly, weaving in and out of people and trying to blend in with the crowd. When I made it a good ways away, I saw where I had to cross, and I did. I crossed the street, and then there was a large crowd of people that I was walking with. I also figured that I had lost the man by then. I just had to walk on the sidewalk straight for like 15 minutes to my parking ramp now. And the farther I walked, the crowd that I was with got smaller and smaller. It went from tons of people on the sidewalk to many, to a decent amount, to just a few. When I had made it to within maybe 2 or 3 minutes of my parking ramp, it was literally just me on the sidewalk. It felt nice to be out of the crowd, until I heard something behind me. "Hey buddy, F you." I turned behind me and saw the same guy. How on earth had he kept up with me? I turned around and faced him. He was walking extremely fast towards me. I said, "What's your problem, pal?" Then I heard a woman's voice from even farther back. A lady was walking behind the guy trying to catch up with him. She said, "Tony, what are you doing? Get back here." It was his wife. Tony, who sounded obviously drunk, said that I had been talking smack. His wife caught up with him and said that it was time to go. She apologized to me and said that Tony had a little too much to drink. Tony then walked closer to me. I thought that he was going to punch me in the face for a second, but then he said, "I was really mad at you, but I forgot why." Then he held out his hand for a handshake. I shook his hand, and he pulled me in and gave me a big hug. Tony's wife said that she called an Uber and it was going to be coming like 5 blocks the other direction. I told Tony congrats on the win and everything was good between us. He then said that he loved me and also that my team sucks. Then we went our separate ways. It was a surprisingly good ending to what I thought was going to be a real horror story. In the end, Tony just had a little too much to drink. He probably doesn't remember what happened, but if he does, I hope I run into him at the next game as well. I live in northern British Columbia, Canada. A couple of years ago, my friend had invited me to come with him, his mom, and his sister to a resort by a lake an hour and a half or so out of town. This was the end of June and beginning of July. The place is called a resort, but it's more like a cabin in the woods type of place. There's a main log building where you check in, and it has a restaurant, a few log cabins, and some spots down by the lake for RVs to park in. There's a highway that you turn off up to the lot where the check-in building is, and to the right of the highway is forest for miles, as well as everywhere else around that area. Around the lake there's some houses and whatnot, but if it isn't a long weekend, there's not too many people out there. The cabins and RV area is separate, and the main building is about a 5 to 8 minute walk away from the cabins up a spiral road. A little bit past the main building, there's a clearing where you can sit at a couple of tables, and about 50 feet into the woods past those tables are 2 small lagoons surrounded by an old wire fence. When we got in for the evening, we unloaded the car, got acquainted with the log cabin, which was nice, and then we went out to explore around. Not too much interesting stuff happened the first day, as we didn't explore a whole lot before dark. Skip to the next day, and it was cloudy and raining, which we were hoping for, as that meant that there were very few people at the resort, and we'd get free rain over it. We explored down by the lake and around the cabin areas more thoroughly, and eventually we made our way up to the clearing where the tables are located. We looked at the tables to see that they hadn't been touched in what looked like a very long time from the amount of grass and weeds that was built up around them. While investigating, I took notice that around 50 feet or so back into the woods, there was what looked to be a clear area. We slid down into this ditch-like area, which was probably around an 8-foot difference in elevation from the table area, and trampled through the brush. We eventually came to this spot, which we were pretty sure were lagoons due to the way they were constructed, and we noticed that there was a wire fence around it. We tooled around the area looking at the lagoons, and eventually we left, planning to come back later in the day as it was getting time to eat dinner. The next day we went back to that area with the tables, planning to go into the lagoon area once again, but before we had a chance to go down the ditch, we stopped because of a noise. The noise we heard were 2 small twigs being walked over and snapped in the lagoon and ditch area we had traveled the previous day. We stuck around for about 10 minutes or so until we got hit with an intense feeling of dread at being attacked by a bear or some other animal that could be walking around in the lagoon area. We went back to our cabin where we played poker for the rest of the night. While playing, we discussed the events that had taken place and eventually laughed it off, saying it was probably just a bear passing through or rabbits in the area. The next day, it was raining heavily and much darker than the past couple of days. We left our cabin and planned to go to the lagoon area later, but we wanted to chill around a medium forested area close to the cabins first. We were messing around in the woods, breaking big sticks on trees. Suddenly, we had heard what sounded to be someone else doing the same thing about 200 feet away in the direction we were facing. It was hard to judge how far exactly it was because of the way the forest carries sound, but it was far in front of us. At first, we thought it was an echo, but after experimenting a little more, we found out that it wasn't an echo. Someone or something out there was also banging sticks, copying us. We wouldn't have cared too much about this until we took notice of where it was. The entire area around there and beyond was all forested and not near any of the cabins. Having someone in those forests along with us that far in, and in the less favorable weather with being very few people at the resort at that time, was unlikely. We decided to leave the area and come back later during the evening. So after leaving the area, we went back around to the lagoon area and listened for a couple minutes. We couldn't hear any walking, so we assumed that we were right about it being a passing forest creature yesterday. Not even 5 minutes into us being around the lagoon area, I told my friend to stop moving. We both stopped and listened. We heard what sounded to be the footsteps again, but as they were coming in louder and faster, we got that same overbearing feeling of dread. We hightailed it out of there spooked, and we booked it back to our cabin. Later that evening, we returned to the forest clearing area where we had heard the branch against the tree noise earlier in the day. We again started smacking branches against trees, this time not hearing anything, but as I turned to my left, something caught my eye. There was what appeared to be a person standing behind a tree, and I saw them duck behind it when they noticed that I noticed them. I nearly screamed, but I held it in and immediately told my friend that we needed to get out of there, and we sprinted back to the cabin. Later that night, while sitting in the loft area where our beds were, we discussed what had happened the last 2 days. The area that I had seen the person was in the exact same area where we had heard the mimic banging earlier that day. Also, both days we had been down near the lagoon area and had heard footsteps walking around. It was very creepy, as there was too much of a coincidence for the person or figure I had seen to not have been watching us and following where we were going both days. Very strange activity, as it was a rainy day and night both days that we were out exploring. We left the next day as our booking had ended, and I was happy that I didn't have to stay there any longer, being constantly watched. Not too long ago, I had something really strange happen. It was just a few weeks back, and I came home from work one day just like any other. I live by myself in an apartment, and I've lived here for about 2 years. It's a decently nice place. Probably 10 or 20 minutes after arriving back from work, at about 4 in the afternoon, there was a knock on my front door. I went over and opened it up to see a woman standing there who I did not recognize. She said that she had witnessed somebody seemingly trying to break into my car just minutes prior. I was told by her that she saw me leaving my car, and a man then walked by several minutes later and tried the doors and windows. She said she just wanted to let me know. Of course, I was very concerned about it. I wanted to know who and why someone would try to break into my vehicle, although I didn't really have much of anything worth stealing in the car. So I left my apartment, and then the woman walked out with me to my car. I always parked in the large parking lot right outside of the apartment building, in usually the same space. Lots of other cars were in the parking lot as well. When we got to my car, thankfully it looked fine. None of the windows were smashed or anything, and the doors were all closed and locked, so it looked like the man didn't get in. And after seeing this and looking around, I didn't see the guy that the lady had described. So I told her thanks, and then I went back into the apartment building. That was weird enough, but things got weirder. The next morning, when I was leaving for work like usual, I noticed one other car running a little ways away in the parking lot. The car was kind of behind me and up against the end of the parking lot. I didn't think anything of it. However, when I was driving away and I went past it, for whatever reason I looked over. I'm not really sure why I did, but I noticed that the same woman appeared to be behind the wheel who had talked to me. I assumed that she just lived in the complex. Now, I had never seen her before prior to when she showed up at my door, but the building was fairly large and I certainly didn't know everybody inside of it. I didn't see her for the rest of that day. The next day though, when I got home from work, I parked in the same space that I usually do. Just seconds after parking, a car entered the lot and parked against the back of the lot behind me a ways. I looked over and saw that it was the same woman. She was parked in the same general spot that I had seen her before. Remembering the previous events, I did not get out of my car right away. I wanted to see what she would do, so I stayed inside of my car. When I did, she did the same thing. After 10 minutes, the woman had not gotten out of her vehicle, and neither did I. It was almost like she was watching me or something. Finally, I got tired of waiting, and I got out and I went in. The woman stayed in her car the entire time. By this point, I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if something weird was going on. I just tried to forget about everything. The next day, I didn't notice the woman at all, but the following one, I was staying up really late. It was much later than I usually do, probably like 1 or 2 a.m. I was just hanging out in the living room and watching movies on TV. Out of nowhere, I heard this noise that sounded like somebody was trying to open the door to my apartment. I looked over to the door and saw the knob starting to turn. Luckily, it was locked and it didn't open. I had no idea who would be trying to enter my place. I certainly don't have any friends that would just walk in. I expected someone to maybe knock on the door or something after that, but nobody did. I quietly got up from the couch and walked over to the door. When I got there, I looked through the peephole. I saw the same woman standing there on the other side. I could not believe it. Why was she trying to just enter my apartment in the middle of the night? I almost opened the door and confronted her, but I decided not to. Instead, I just kept watching her. She stood there right in front of my door for maybe 30 seconds. Then she just turned and walked away. I was left very confused, and since then, I haven't seen her. I don't know why this woman is seemingly stalking me. I'm pretty sure that she does not even live in the apartment complex. I've looked in the general area of the parking lot where she parked those times, and I haven't seen her car. I even saw a few of my neighbors in the hallways, and I asked them if they had ever seen the woman or know if she lives in the building. Nobody knew her. I'm hoping that I never see her again. I live in Utah and spend nearly every weekend I can out exploring the state's West Desert for the last decade or so. It's mostly an absolutely empty no man's land, full of abandoned mines, grazing sheep, and military test ranges. One area in particular is a small mountain range that I travel near often. I'm obsessed with it and probably know this range possibly better than any other person alive. I've hiked every prominent peak, driven every side canyon, hiked every major abandoned mine. This just sets the stage for how familiar and experienced I am with the area. The range sits next to the famous Bonneville Salt Flats. If you're not familiar with it, this is a dry alkaline lake bed covering nearly 50 square miles. It's one of a few wide open spots on Earth long enough to hold annual races where the world's land speed records have been set at nearly 800 miles per hour. When they're not holding this annual race week, you're free to drive out onto the flats wherever you want. It's a surreal experience to camp out there, so I do it frequently, almost always alone. There's a particular spot on the flats I like to go out to camp. It's flat and as remote gets, literally 10 miles from the nearest road, hill, bush, or even rock. You have to imagine intuitively that if you see anyone else out there at all, you tend to stay away. You have no idea what motivations other people have for being out there. They could be transporting drugs, hiding a body, or whatever. When camping out in an area that's remote, it's best to remain cautious. That being said, I've never been bothered in the decade of doing this, never heard bad news stories, and no one else has ever come within miles of me. On the most silent days, you can hear a passenger car approaching from several miles away. About 5 years ago now, I went out to the same familiar spot to camp. It was exactly 104 degrees Fahrenheit that day, so I had a large, orange sun shelter stocked up next to my trunk. It was pin-drop silent all day, to the point where your ears sort of rung a bit. The heat baked the salty surface so much that it was all curled up everywhere, forming these crunchy rolls of texture. They were unavoidable walking around, and made a loud, satisfying crunch sound. I didn't see a single other car on the horizon in any direction all day. All I heard was the rumble of a train nearly 10 miles away. Around 7 p.m., I fell asleep for a nap under my sun shelter. I woke up naturally about an hour later. I stood up to stretch and spun slowly around, fully surveying my 360-degree view, seeing nothing for miles and no signs of life. It was about 45 minutes until the sun set behind the mountains, but plenty of light to see clearly, still about 100 degrees and dead silent. Whenever I'm out there in that wilderness, I always carry a pistol with me strapped onto my backpack. I want it to be accessible with my backpack on and also visible if I ever come across creeps on my hike. I started to chop wood I'd brought for a campsite for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, about 30 feet away from my truck and sun shelter. Suddenly, between chops, I heard something behind me that sounded like the fabric of my shelter rustling. It took my brain an odd half-second to process it, because I hadn't really heard anything besides myself all day and the air was dead silent. I quickly spun around and there was a girl there. I absolutely froze and my blood drained into my feet. She was only maybe 50 yards away, walking sort of towards my camp, but slightly diagonally across the front of my truck. She was headed in the direction of further wilderness. What I'd heard was actually her footsteps loudly crunching the salty texture on the ground I mentioned earlier. She wasn't looking directly at me, and she was just walking at a normal pace. She appeared to be roughly 18 years old, wearing a homemade tie-dyed t-shirt and jean shorts. She was wearing Converse sneakers, not running or hiking shoes. She had no water or backpack, not even a hat or even sunglasses, and she was walking directly towards the setting sun in 100-degree heat. She didn't look disheveled in any way, or not even remotely tired, so I had a rough time processing what was happening for the first several seconds. I quickly scanned the horizon behind her for another person or car or anything, but there was nothing there, just her. I stood up, put the axe down, and blurted out something dumb like, "Hot day for a walk, isn't it? Is everything all right?" I was shaking, absolutely flabbergasted at what she was doing, and how and why had she made it practically next to me without me hearing or seeing her approach? Without even really turning her head to look at me, and while still walking now almost next to my truck, she replied, "My friends are right there." She motioned behind her back with her thumb. There was nothing behind her as far as I could see, many miles. She continued on past my camp towards the mountain range miles away to the northwest. I was so surprised to have human contact in such a remote spot, and so suddenly, that I really had nothing to say. By the time I thought to offer her water or ask if she was okay again, she was almost 150 yards away, but I could still hear her crunchy footsteps as if she was right next to me. I grabbed my binoculars and just stared intently as she continued on. I fully expected her to vaporize into some mirage, or for me to wake up in my chair again. My jaw was on the ground in shock. I sat against my truck for a full 15 minutes, never taking my eyes off her in the binoculars. She never once looked back at me or changed her pace. She had to have been nearly a mile away at that point, and I could still hear her crunching footsteps plain as day. As the sun was setting now, she started to slightly blend into the darker mountain range on the horizon. Then I heard her phone ring. The sound carries very well in the flat, empty wasteland. I did not have cell service myself, but through the binoculars I saw her reach into her pocket, and even heard the faint murmur of her talking. She was on the phone for maybe a minute and just kept walking. About a minute after that, I suddenly began to hear a car behind me. I spun back around, and there were headlights on the opposite horizon, maybe 3 miles away, coming towards me. The engine noise was loud, and I could tell they were traveling fast. I was starting to get super paranoid, like this was some sort of a setup or a recon at my camp, and a wide variety of other slightly irrational things. I didn't know if I was being robbed or messed with in some other way, so I took cover behind my truck and waited. It looked like they were driving right at me, very fast. Not a minute later, and the car went sailing past my camp, rudely kicking up a huge dust cloud headed in the vague direction of the girl. It was a late 90s Range Rover. Despite all their windows being open and them being only 50 yards away, they were doing at least 50 miles per hour, and it was getting dark, so I couldn't identify any passengers. I could no longer see the girl. A short while later, I saw their taillights approach roughly where I lost track of the girl, and then I saw brake lights. Then headlights, then brake lights, and repeat like they were spinning donuts on the salt. Then I saw headlights again, and I heard the engine rev back up loudly. They were racing back towards me now. Again, I took cover behind my truck, and at this point chambered a round into my gun, because I was convinced that this was somehow going to end badly for me. A minute later, the same thing happened. They went flying past my camp in the direction they had come from, fortunately without stopping, but even faster and closer than the first pass. It was certainly some type of a signal message to me. I could have had a kid or a dog running around or something. It was very dangerous. After another couple minutes, their taillights disappeared over the horizon in the direction of the nearest town. I didn't know what to do or think. Nothing I'd witnessed was technically illegal, and it made no sense at all. I had so many unanswered questions in my mind. What was the girl doing out there 10 miles on foot from anything? My immediate thought was that she was some kind of an endurance athlete training for an Ironman race or something. But she was too young and wasn't dressed right and had no supplies. Maybe she had gotten into a fight with her parents or friends while driving around the flats and had stomped away from them for a couple hours. Why did she approach my camp alone, with me, another stranger, obviously swinging an axe and wearing a gun? How did I not hear her approach? Was she being trafficked or something worse? Why wouldn't she have asked me for help or showed some concern on her face? Since I had no cell service, I couldn't report it. Even so, the likelihood that I would be able to point out their location or anything useful to 1 or 2 sheriffs that patrol the area was very low. I immediately decided to move my camp though. I thought maybe they would come back, or maybe they marked my location as they drove past. I set up my camp again about 10 miles away, higher in the foothills of the mountains. I was hoping for a cell signal up there, but had nothing. I went to bed and called the sheriff the next morning as I got back into town. I gave them the story and the description of the girl. They didn't sound concerned, and I have never heard anything since. The creepiest part to me is how I didn't hear her until she was within 50 yards, even though I could hear her walking nearly a mile away later. Maybe this was all just a very elaborate hallucination that happened to me, but it all looked and sounded very real. I guess I'll never know what strange thing was going on that night.